Hello, anybody, and thanks for tuning in to Monday Morning Handicapping. This is a grain of salt edition where I look at some stats and try to determine some insight and gain some knowledge for my handicapping moving into the future. And in this video, I'm going to be taking a look at the upcoming Tampa Bay Derby, which does have Kentucky Derby points on the line. And what I'm going to focus on is the pace of the races of the last 11 runnings of the Tampa Bay Derby, and just try to get a sense of how these races are typically run and also won, and where those horses are as far as the pace is concerned when the horses do win their race. Few thoughts on Tampa Bay Downs before we get started. I typically play the NorCal circuit, but as many of you may know, the local tracks around here have been shutting down recently. So Tampa Bay Downs does seem like a good substitute for anyone that was playing those Northern California races. The Tampa Bay meet runs from November into May right up to the Kentucky Derby. It offers 89 days of racing throughout this time. Tampa Bay offers good weather, so not a lot of rainy or muddy tracks. It offers a turf and dirt course. It's a fair track. I do feel like it tends to favor a little bit of those front running types, but when you're handicapping and you know that, you can kind of depend on your horses to keep up the pace if they're not going too fast. It overall just seems like a fair track. There are closers that can win, but like typical dirt and dry tracks, it does tend to seem to favor some horses that like to be more forwardly placed. Tampa Bay Downs also offers full fields. I see a lot of 8 to 14 horse fields, a couple of races with also eligibles on there. And I do find that it's comparable to the NorCal circuit in terms of contenders each race. There may be a field of 12, but there might be 4 horses right off the bat that you can kind of toss off your ticket. Not saying they can't win, but like in NorCal, there would be a few horses in there that you just think are struggling at the level, need some softer company. And I feel like just overall, when I'm handicapping the Tampa Bay Downs races, it does remind me a bit of, say, Golden Gate Fields, which I really got accustomed to handicapping. Also, a positive about Tampa Bay Downs, a lot of big name trainers and owners and jockeys come to Tampa Bay Downs, especially on these bigger days, and they do host some big races. Again, this is a Kentucky Derby prep race, so 50 points awarded to the winner, which may or may not get you into the starting gate. That's kind of right on the cusp, but a lot of big names and big races do race at Tampa Bay Downs. Another thing I like about Tampa Bay Downs is the race caller named Jason Beam. I just think he's generally a good race caller, and he's also got a really good podcast for anyone that's interested in horse racing. This podcast isn't necessarily for experts, it's friendly to newcomers or experts. Jason Beam covers a lot of topical items in the sporting realm, mostly horse racing, but he'll talk about other sports once in a while, his life, his history coming up. It's just an entertaining podcast all the way around. I take his opinion seriously and incorporate it into my own thinking, but it's just generally a very entertaining, very fun podcast that I think I would recommend to anybody. So the Tampa Bay Derby, it's the annual Kentucky Derby prep held at Tampa Bay. It's a race in early March. This one is taking place Saturday, March 8th of 2025. 50 points to the Kentucky Derby to the winner, 25 to second, 15 to third, 10 to fourth, 5 to fifth. And again, you're going to need about 50 points to get into the starting gate for the Kentucky Derby. That's not guaranteed, but it's a good bar to set. So if you get 50 points, you're looking pretty good. You may need more. That may be enough. It kind of depends on how things shake out. So definitely a top Derby prep this far into the year. The Tampa Bay Derby is a mile and a 16th or 8.5 furlongs. Remember, a furlong is an eighth of a mile. So 8.5 furlongs on the dirt track at Tampa Bay Downs, which is a 1 mile track. It's for 3-year-olds and upwards. Again, this is a Kentucky Derby prep. The Kentucky Derby is limited to horses that are 3 years old. And for those of you that don't know, all horses are a year older on January 1st, no matter when they were actually born. Once the new year comes around, every horse is considered 1 year older. The purse for this race is $400,000. Now, before we dive into the pace scenario of the last 11 runnings, this is a diagram of the track, this race. So they're going to start here, middle of the stretch. Here's the eventual finish line, but they're going to go around first. Here's the quarter mile. So when we talk about quarter mile times, it's about this far into the race that those times are referring to. This is the half mile. Not only are we going to talk about the half mile times and the splits in between each individual quarter mile, but when I'm gauging the horses that won the race, when I say horses that won wire to wire, they were on the lead at this point. When I say horses that won by less than 3 lengths, I'm talking about at this point. They were less than 3 lengths off of the leaders at this point. Or horses that won that were 3 lengths or further back, we're talking about horses at this point that were 3 or more lengths back from the leader at this point. And then we go over here to the 3/4 mile. These are approximate little bars. I put them on myself. And here's the 1 mile mark, and they're going to finish up the final 16th right here at the finish line. So here's the Google Sheets that I made, and I will provide this in the description below. There will be a link to this Google Sheets document. But what I did is went back and looked at the last 11 years of the Tampa Bay Derby being run. You'll see the years in this column here, the track conditions listed here. Here we're taking a look at the times that the leaders of each individual race ran the first quarter mile in. So last year, the first quarter mile, by the first horse to hit that quarter mile mark, that first green bar we looked at, it was running 25.25 seconds. The year before, the leader got to that quarter mile mark in 23.63, and so on down the line. You can look back at the years. LB refers to lengths back. So how far back was the eventual winner of the race at the quarter mile pole? So last year, the eventual winner at the quarter mile pole was 2.5 lengths back. The year before that, the eventual winner was 8 3/4 lengths back at the quarter mile pole. In 2022, this was a wire-to-wire winner, so the horse was 0 lengths back, and so on down the line. The split, this indicates the quarter mile times between the previous quarter mile to the next quarter mile. So in this column, for instance, the split is 25.89, meaning the first quarter mile was running 25.25. Going to the half mile marker, that quarter mile was running 25.89. The rate is how much that split is slower than the previous one. So the horses in the lead slowed down by 0.64 seconds between these two quarter miles. So the second quarter mile was slower than the first quarter mile by 0.64 seconds. Then we move over to the half mile marker. How fast was the race run to the half mile mark? 51.14. The eventual winner at this point was 1 3/4 lengths back. So he was 2.5 lengths back at the quarter mile, made up a little bit of ground. Now is only 1 3/4 lengths back. The split of this quarter mile, the half mile, to the 3/4 is running 25.07 seconds, a rate of negative 0.82. So they actually are running faster to the 3/4 pole than they did to the half mile pole. This rate is referring back to the previous split of 25.89. They actually ran this next quarter mile 0.82 seconds faster. To the 3/4 mile pole, sorry, I can't format it properly to show minutes, so you have to do some math. That's 1 minute and 16 seconds to the 3/4 mile pole. The eventual winner was 2 lengths back at this point, so actually lost a little bit of ground here. This split from the 3/4 to the 1 mile was running 23.15 seconds, a rate of negative 1.92 seconds. So they ran this next quarter mile almost 2 seconds faster than they ran the quarter mile to the 3/4 mile, from the half mile to the 3/4. So as you can see, they were going pretty slow early on, which enabled those horses to run much faster later in the race. To the 1 mile mark, they ran it in 1 minute, 39 seconds, 0.36. The eventual winner at this point was 1 length back, so picking up ground again. The split here, because there's only a 1/16 of a mile left, it's not a full quarter mile, it's only 6.11 seconds. There's no rate deceleration here, but you will see 5/16. So the final 5/16, the 3/4 mile mark to the mile pole and to the 1 1/16 pole, the last 5/16 of the race, again, from the 3/4 miles to the 1 1/16, was running 29.26 seconds. Here's the final time of the race and the average slow down rate per quarter. So I averaged up the rates, how much they're slowing down between each quarter mile, averaged it out, and negative 0.7 indicates that this race actually got quicker throughout the race, which doesn't surprise me when you consider how slow they were going early. 25 seconds to the first quarter, 51 to the half is awfully slow. Horses have a lot of stamina left, so the fact that this race actually got much quicker later makes some sense to me. As you can see, I did this for the past 11 runnings. In 2023, the average slowdown rate was 0.74. So each quarter mile on average slowed down by almost 3/4 of a second. You can see the quarter mile to the half mile was actually run faster, negative 0.30 seconds. But the next split, this quarter mile, was run 1.1 seconds slower than the previous quarter mile. The next quarter mile was run 1.41 seconds slower to the next quarter mile. But if we go down to the very bottom, we have our averages. So I took the average quarter mile times, lengths back, splits, and rates for every single one of the races. And here are your times for that. I have the wire-to-wire averages, so there were 2 wire-to-wire winners in the last 11 runnings. How fast those wire-to-wire winners ran their race and how much they slowed down throughout. I have all the races for horses that won the race that were less than 3 lengths off the leader at the half-mile pole. There were 6 of those winners out of 11. And for horses that were 3 or more lengths on average at the half-mile pole, I have all those race averages here. And if we scroll to the right, I have the odds of the eventual winners. the average odds for each of those scenarios. I have the post position they were in, the average post position right here, 6.3, so middle of the track. The trainer for each of the winners, the jockey for each of the winners, the previous race that the eventual winner ran in before this race, and their finishing position in those races. 55% of the winners in the last 11 runnings of the Tampa Bay Derby won their last start. So again, this file will be available in the description below. So I'm going to focus down on the culmination of things, that bottom section that I briefly mentioned in the last little clip. So we're going to look at the pace for the last 11 runnings. These fractions refer to the leader of the race, remember, not the eventual winner. So you're going to have to do a little math. One length is equal to a fifth of a second, which is equal to 0.2 seconds. So for example, when the eventual winner was less than 3 lengths at the half-mile pole off of the leader, if the leader ran the first quarter mile in 24.16 seconds and the eventual winner was 1.5 lengths off of the leader, that roughly equates to him running the race 0.3 seconds slower than the eventual winner. So for every length, you add 0.2 seconds to the quarter mile time, and that's roughly how fast the eventual winner was running the race. So at the half mile pole here, the leader ran it in 48.66 seconds. We add 0.2 seconds to this time, 48.86. That's how fast the eventual winner ran to the half mile, and so on and so forth. The average winning time, faster than wire-to-wire winners, but slower than the 3+ length closers. Wire-to-wire winners, there were 2 out of 11, 18% were wire-to-wire winners. But as you can see, the wire-to-wire winning average time is slower than the overall average there. But the time for wire-to-wire winners is slower than the horses that won from 3 or more lengths off, which makes sense because when horses close, that usually requires the horses going really fast in the early stages of the race, tiring out and allowing one of those deep closers to rally past. Wire-to-wire winners are able to make the lead early, but are able to decelerate on average less drastically throughout the race when compared to races won by horses winning from 3 or more lengths back at the half-mile mark, 0.59 seconds versus 0.81, which is equivalent to about 1.1 lengths faster per quarter. So if we look up here to the wire-to-wire winners, their average deceleration rate per quarter, they're running on average each quarter mile of the race 0.59 seconds slower, where the leaders in those races where the horses won from 3 or more lengths off the leaders, that deceleration rate is much higher, meaning the horses in front are slowing down much more, about 1 length more per quarter than horses that win wire-to-wire. Races with wire-to-wire winners are on average slightly faster to the half mile, but slightly slower for the remainder. So if we compare our wire-to-wire times to all averages, they're a little bit faster early in the first quarter and the half mile pole, but they're slightly slower at 3/4 and the 1 mile and even the final time. Winners coming from less than 3 lengths but not on the lead win with splits that are relatively even. 6 out of the 11 previous winners of the Tampa Bay Derby won with this margin early on in the race, 55%. Notice that each of the splits are all 24 and change. So for horses that were up near the lead, less than 3 lengths off of the leader, the splits, the first quarter mile in 24.16, the next quarter mile in 24.5, the next in 24.29, and the next in 24.56. So a pretty even running throughout the race. Notice that the deceleration throughout the race is the least for these types of winners. 0.13 equals 0.65 lengths deceleration per quarter. So if we look at the slowdown rate, the deceleration, how much slower are they running on average each quarter mile? Just 0.13 seconds. That's, again, 0.65 lengths, or a half of a length basically, per quarter mile that they're slowing down. So they're running basically even throughout the race at an even tempo. These winners are closer to the front, going a sustainable rate, which enables them to have enough stamina to maintain their speed in the later stages of the race and even pass those front runners who may be getting a little bit more tired or just don't possess the talent level that some of those stalking horses have. Winners coming from 3 or more lengths off the leaders face the fastest paces. There were 3 out of 11 winners in the last 11 Tampa Bay Derbies. That's 27% win rate. These horses face the fastest paces. The leaders decelerate drastically from the toll of quick early fractions, 0.46 on average versus 0.81. That's a deceleration rate of about 1.75 lengths per quarter. So if we look at the horses that won from 3 or more lengths off at the half mile pole, these races are decelerating at 0.81 seconds per quarter, where the average for all winners is about half that, 0.46 per quarter. Top performing closers are forced to commence their all-out drives earlier in the race to catch up and sustain their all-out drive for longer distances. Again, it takes a top performing horse to pull this maneuver off, but they're able to do so, and those are the ones that win. It requires a combination of their acceleration and the deceleration of the leaders to pull this off. Notice that these winners are on average 4.17 lengths back at the 3/4 mile mark. So if we look up here, 3/4 mile, on average, these horses are coming from a little over 4 lengths off at the 3/4 mile pole, and only on average 0.67 lengths back at the mile mark. So right here, we look at 1 mile. These same horses have made up about 3.5 lengths on the leaders just within this 1/4 mile. So they're accelerating while the leaders are decelerating, which equates to these closers running about 0.7 seconds faster in that 1/4 mile split than the leaders. So from 3/4 to 1 mile, on average, these deep closers are running 0.7 seconds faster than those front running leaders. And that's what enables them to catch up so quickly. Because remember, 1/5 of a second equals 1 length, and this is 3.5 lengths right there. And the math checks out. This is 3.5 lengths in terms of how many lengths back. So bringing it all home, when you're handicapping the Tampa Bay Derby, as I will be doing shortly, which horses do you project to be on the lead? Which horses had their best performances on the lead, and at what pace? What kind of fractions were they running? Were they closer to the averages? Were they closer to these wire-to-wire winners? Is there a lone leader that can cruise? Is there a speed duel at play? So if there's a couple of horses that look like they really want to go for the lead, maybe they're going to run faster than the wire-to-wire averages thus far. Maybe they're going to run something closer to what the horses 3 or more lengths off have seen and won before. Have these front runners shown an affinity for this distance? How much is their deceleration compared to these averages? So if you have a bunch of front runners that have been running a mile or maybe 7 furlongs even, now they're stretching out to a further distance, are they going to be able to handle the distance? See what their deceleration look like in those shorter races coming up to a mile and a 16th against possibly a tougher field of horses. If not, were they possibly hindered by faster than usual early splits in previous races? So if a horse looks like he's fading badly and is stretching out a little bit, go check. Where his last few races, was he running 22 seconds to the first 1/4 mile, 22 and change, maybe 23 flat? Were they running 46 and change to the half mile? If a horse is running that much faster, 1/5 of a second does make a big difference. So if they're running a couple seconds faster in these early parts of the race, you can expect them to fade later. But if you think they can come into this race, not face a lot of adversity on the front end and slow it down somewhere closer to these averages, maybe the horse would be able to hang on today. You're going to have to do your own handicapping, compare it to these notes, and make the call for yourself. Which horse or horses do you project to be less than 3 lengths off the leaders at the half mile mark? What tempo have they shown they can sustain? So when they run good races, were they running closer to the 23-second mark? Were they running closer to the 24? If they're trying to stay close to faster races, that might take a little bit of kick out of them later in the race. They might not have the stamina to keep on. If they've been keeping up with slower paces and having that kick late, maybe they're going to be too far back today if the race is much faster than they're previously keeping up with. How fast are their late splits when running close to the early splits you predict in this race? So if this race you project it to be, let's just say, close to the wire-to-wire average, have these horses that are less than 3 lengths off of the leaders able to stay close to 23.5 second early fractions, 47.5 second to the half mile? Are they able to stay close and keep on later in their previous races? If so, how much is their deceleration later in the race? Are they able to kick on? Is their next split higher or lower than this split right here, 25.3 to the 1 mile mark? If they're running this split in 24 and change, maybe they are contenders to close on any leaders in this race that project to run about what this average has been so far. How much deceleration did they show per quarter? Again, how much deceleration did they show facing quicker paces or slower paces compared to how you project the pace to be run in this Tampa Bay Derby? What horse or horses do you project to be 3 or more lengths off the leader at the half mile mark? Might they benefit from a speed duel in this rendition of the Tampa Bay Derby, or faster than average early splits projected in this race? Do you think this race is going to be run really fast? How fast? Does that benefit a 3 or more length closer? Might they benefit from this particular distance? Maybe these 3-length closers are closing really well in 1 mile races, and looks like if they could just go an extra 16th of a mile, they may have been able to win some of their previous races. So maybe the added distance helps some of those late closers and hinders some of those front runners that you're projecting in this race. On average, these types run their later splits around 0.7 seconds faster than the leaders. Are today's contenders capable of that performance when compared to the horses that will be in front of them earlier in this race? So, does this rendition of the Tampa Bay Derby shape up like the averages? Does it shape up like the races that these 3 length or more winners have won before? Does it look like the pace is going to be 23:46.5, a minute 10 to the 3/4 mark? Or does it seem like it might be a little bit softer, allowing some of those front runners to maintain their speed and stamina throughout the race? That's it for the Tampa Derby and my pace breakdown. Again, I will have a link to the Google Sheets file that will be included in the description below. Again, this is all just food for thought, something to think about and refer back to when you're projecting the race coming this Saturday. I appreciate everybody watching. Feedback is appreciated. I love getting the comments and replying and having a little dialogue. Please like, subscribe, and or share with friends. Again, my channel is aimed specifically at newcomers to the sport that are curious but don't know a whole lot about it. I try to explain things in a manner that anyone can understand. If you know anyone that might be interested in the sport, I have a couple of playlists that might be good for them. One is How to Read a Racing Form, where I just break down all the components of the racing form into bite-sized pieces, really simply explain what it's telling you, what's on the page, and make it real digestible to anyone who may have never picked up a racing before or just find it quite daunting when they look at it. It is a lot of information, but I chunk it out and make it real easy to understand. I also have a playlist called Betting on Horse Racing. That's where I go through each individual bet, explain what it is, how you place it, how you tell a clerk what you want to bet, how much it costs, and some things that I look for when I'm placing such wagers and how I like to play them. That's been useful for a couple of people that have commented and asked for my advice on certain ticket structures, but it's all in those two playlists. I think they're good for newcomers, so if you know anyone, again, share those. But I appreciate anybody who's watching. Good luck in the Tampa Bay Derby. Let me know who you like, and I'll see you all next time.